Hey, welcome back to the workshop. For today's project, I'm going to be making a leather sheath for my antique Moore knife. Let's get started. This sheath is going to be made in what I like to call the Scandinavian or Nordic style, where a leather sheath is wrapped around a wood liner. I'm using 1/8 inch thick ash hardwood for this. The ash wood was difficult to work using the limited tool set that I have here. I think I could have used a slightly softer wood without compromising the integrity of the knife sheath, and it would have been much easier to cut and shape. Traditionally, the wood liner is made from a thicker piece of wood, which gets carved out. But I'm going to be making a sort of 3-piece wood sandwich construction here. I don't think it matters all that much, as long as the wood liner is able to protect the knife blade from cutting through the leather. In the interest of saving a little time, I'm not going to show making both halves. They're both the same anyway, so you get the idea. Also, I managed to break these pieces of wood while cutting out the shapes, which was disappointing. But once it's all glued up and wrapped in leather, that isn't really going to matter either. I'm using Titebond 2 wood glue for this, which I selected because Titebond 2 is supposed to be waterproof, or at least water resistant, which is good in a knife sheath that I'll be carrying outdoors in all kinds of weather. But as a wood glue, I have to say that I like regular Titebond 1 much better than this stuff. I can't quite tell you what's wrong with it, but Titebond 2 is different. It doesn't smooth out as nicely or something. I just don't like it. Press the wood sandwich flat with any convenient weight you have available and allow the glue to dry for 24 hours. I should also mention that it wasn't originally my intention to have to drill holes in this and then cut between the holes. I thought I could cut out all the shapes with this cheap Japanese-style saw I picked up from Harbor Freight. But as it turns out, this saw doesn't cut curves worth shit. I should have bought a handheld scroll saw instead. So, me drilling the holes and cutting between them is a compromise to make up for my poor choice of saw. Okay, now I can hear you saying, "Oh, Shawn, what are you doing? You shouldn't cut towards yourself like that. It's super dangerous and you're going to get hurt." And you're not wrong, but you're not 100% right either. Carving towards yourself is more dangerous than carving away from yourself, but it's not that dangerous if you know what you're doing. I highly recommend everyone goes into YouTube here and checks out the Morakniv Swedish grip sessions. They got a gnarly old dude on there who will teach you how to carve wood in all directions with a minimum of risk of injury. But I'm also here to tell you that sooner or later you will get cut. Getting cut is just part of working with tools. It's not that big of a deal, it doesn't hurt that much, and sharp cuts heal quickly. Put a Band-Aid on it and get back to work. Okay, so I should mention that it's sometimes the projects just don't work out. And I got a little crazy with this wood liner here, and I poked a big hole in it. Now, in the end, this is going to get all wrapped over with leather, and the hole here isn't going to matter that much. But I am a little concerned that in wrapping my leather around this hole will show if I don't cover it with something. So I think what I'm going to do is make a paper patch that goes over this and soak that all through and through with water-resistant glue. And that should give us a nice smooth surface to mold the leather around. I think it's going to work out okay. I think I can get away with this, because the hole I'm covering up is going to be on the back side of the knife blade anyway. There's no risk of cutting through. If the hole were on the sharp edge side, I'd have to throw this whole thing away and start over, or maybe work up some kind of wood patch or something. But thankfully, that isn't necessary this time. Now the wood liner is complete, and it's time to move on to the leather work. A rough outline of the leather is traced onto paper, and this will be used as our template. One of the nice things about this style of leather sheath is that the cuts don't need to be super straight or precise at this stage. We're basically making an oversized leather rectangle to wrap around the knife and the wood liner. And as long as you have good all-around coverage, the excess can be trimmed to fit later. I'm using 6-ounce vegetable tanned leather. It is approximately 3/32 of an inch thick. The leather is going to be wet formed around the knife and the wood liner. This will be left to dry overnight. So before I do that, I need to wrap the knife in plastic to protect it from the damp. The leather is now briefly dipped into warm water. This untreated leather soaks up water like a sponge. It only takes a few seconds for the leather to be soaked through and through. After dipping, the leather is then removed from the water and allowed to air dry for several hours. I want the leather to be fairly damp, but not dripping wet. In this state, it can be stretched and molded around the knife, almost like molding a stiff clay. After the leather is stretched into place, it is clamped and left to dry for at least 24 hours. Once the leather is completely dry, it will be very stiff and hold the molded shape. Next, 1/8 inch stitching holes are drilled down the seam. These holes are spaced approximately 1/4 inch apart. Traditionally, these holes are punched rather than drilled, but I've never had much luck with leather punches. Drilling is much easier and faster. The end result may not be as clean as a punched hole, but for my purposes, it will be good enough. Alright, well, that mostly worked. The drill bit got off angle here and we put a couple of scarfs in the leather. That's unfortunate. Can't do much about it now. Guess we're stuck with them. And then down here at the end, I misaligned a couple of holes and put 2 holes where they shouldn't have been. But those ought to pretty well close up once we get to our leather treatment. Next, I'm going to sew the seam shut using a waxed nylon lacing. I don't remember off the top of my head, but I think sewing from both sides with 2 needles like this is called a saddle stitch. The belt loop on this sheath is going to be a sort of hybrid design that combines elements of both the traditional Finland puukko style loop and a modern bushcraft dangler sheath. I'm not entirely sure how this is going to work out in the end, but I think it's an experiment worth trying. Next, I'm going to cut a simple pattern into the face of the sheath using a tool called a freehand groover. The freehand groover is intended to cut lines for recessed stitching, but I find it's pretty handy for simple patterns as well. Apologies to all the serious leather workers out there, but this sort of thing isn't really my area of expertise. Next, I need to close up the belt loop. This belt loop is a 1/2 inch wide strip of leather that is folded over itself at the ends and stitched shut. My hope is that this will permit the knife to dangle at a slightly handle forward angle rather than straight up and down. Since this knife is intended to be worn on kind of the left front side and drawn with the right hand in the Nordic style, a slight forward tilt should make things easier to deal with. Now it's time to apply my waterproofing treatment. As I've shown in other videos, this treatment is a mixture of beeswax, pine tar, lanolin, and neatsfoot oil. I used to put boiled linseed oil into this mix, but I have since stopped doing that as I felt like the linseed oil didn't combine well with the other products. I should also mention that this batch of treatment is specifically intended for knife sheaths, and as such, this mix contains a lot more beeswax to fill in the leather pores and make the finished sheath almost as hard as wood. If I were going to treat a more flexible leather item, such as boots or belts, I'd use a slightly different mix that contained less beeswax and more neatsfoot oil. I apply a thick coat of wax, then heat it with a heat gun to soak it into the leather. This process will be repeated several times until the leather is completely saturated and no more wax will soak in. Lastly, the seam edge gets burnished with a wood burnishing tool. Also, I should note that the hot wax pulled a bunch of black stain off of these gloves and embedded it into the leather. Now the sheath looks terrible, but I think I'm stuck with it. Maybe we'll call this artistically aged rather than accidentally filthy. But I guess it doesn't matter. It's done now. Alright, so I think that's about as good as that's going to get. The finish on this didn't come out nearly as nice as I had hoped. I should have dyed it first with a dark brown leather dye, and I think that would have covered up a lot of the flaws in this. But as it stands, I guess it's kind of rustic looking, and that sort of fits the knife. I don't dislike it. On the back here, I'm pretty happy with the way the stitching came out. That worked out pretty good. And putting my mixture of beeswax, oil, and pine tar on it has closed up those two little holes I accidentally drilled up in the front. And it's done a lot to close up the drill marks back here and on this back side too. So we got that going for us. The fit's pretty good. Got a nice, satisfying click where it locks in. And that's important to have. It's not coming out of there. The knife is very well retained in the sheath, so that's good. And the tilt angle with the belt loop worked out pretty good as well. Alright, so what did we learn here? All in all, it came out okay. It's a functional knife sheath, and it's going to last a good long time, and it's going to be fine. If I had this to do over again, I'd do a couple of things differently. I think maybe using ash as the wood for the inside was a poor choice. It was really hard to work with hand tools. And I don't know if you need a super hardwood to go in here. Really the wood is just in there to prevent the edge of the knife from cutting out through the side of the leather. And to do that, it doesn't need to be super rock hard. It's not really like a structural thing. We're not trying to resist a whole lot of bending or anything in here. I think I could have got away with a softer wood. That would have been easier to work with. The other thing I should have done is I could have done a better job of tightening the leather around the insert when this was wet. particularly up here at the tip. This there's a lot of air gap up here. I think that could have been tighter and more form fit to the shape of the wood insert. And also back here at the kind of transition between the wood part and where it holds the knife handle, I think that could have been a little tighter and more defined. Anyway, I should also point out that my strap design here is completely non-traditional. This is something I just kind of made up on the fly, and but I'm pretty happy with how that came out. I think that's going to work just fine. Remember that traditionally this style of knife sheath is designed to kind of hang, for a right-handed user, it kind of hangs on your left side and has to be held and then removed with the right hand. And that helps, so like when you sit down, the knife kind of comes out and it sits on your lap, and you can still reach it while you're sitting down. And if this were a more traditional modern style knife sheath and it was stuck to your side real tightly, it would be a problem to get at while you were sitting down. So all in all, I'd say that was a moderately successful project. Not every part of it went exactly right, but in every project, not every part does go exactly right. But I think as long as it does its job in the end and we all learn something, then that's not a bad day in the workshop. So I hope you found that interesting, and I'll be right back here in the workshop with another video just as soon as I can. See you then.